Hello and welcome to everyone. For those who are tuning in, we're glad that you're here with us. And this evening, we will be having a discussion with professionals in the field of law and leadership. So, in light of recent events, America and other countries have been making an outcry propelling the movement of Black Lives Matter. And as Christians, we have been asking, what can we do and what is our position in breaking down systemic racism? So today, the panel will focus on not just what to do, but then also how can we be more knowledgeable of the systems that are in place and the role that race plays in these systems. So I would like to thank the panelists for being willing to share and engage with us about this pertinent topic. And we do recognize that one of our guests, Mr. Delamar, will be leaving us for a short while, will be with us for a short while, but we do appreciate that he has made time to be with us, as well as all our other panelists as well. I want to remind you that this discussion will feature a variety of perspectives, so I ask that we all listen with prayerful, open hearts and minds. This discussion will also be two parts, and if time permits today, we will have a question and answer segment for those tuning in. So you can submit your questions by the chat box on YouTube, and we'll see if we can answer some of those for you today. So what we'll do is we'll start off with prayer and then proceed. Dear Father and friend, I want to thank you so much for your blessings of the Sabbath. I want to thank you for community and for this opportunity to engage and converse with each other to learn more about what we should do to be effective Christians, people. And I pray now that you will guide this discussion, Lord. May this be edifying. And for those listening, Lord, may I pray that you'll answer questions that might be on people's hearts. And may this be one that we remember as we move forward from this day forward. And bless us and be with us. In Christ's name I do pray. Amen.
Amen.
I would like for those who are tuning in, if you can look to a link that is attached to this discussion that has the bios of all those who are with us today. They have done so much work, and I'm truly excited to be talking with them. But for right now, you can also tune in for just a brief introduction from each of them. So what I'll do is I'll call on some of our panelists to give your name and then also what you are currently doing in your career. So let's start with Miss Joy.
Happy Sabbath, everyone, and good evening. My name is Joy Walker, and I'm currently working for the state of Georgia in the Department of Human Services in their procurement and contracts unit. I'm having spent a number of years in and around the courthouse. The Department of Human Services in Georgia takes care of the most vulnerable in the state of Georgia, the aged. The Department of Family and Children Services, those that deal with child support issues and the like. And so I've been with them for almost 6 years.
Thank you. And Brother Jenkins.
Yes, happy Sabbath and good evening. It is indeed a pleasure to be here amongst the esteemed individuals. I have a background that deals specifically with troubled youth. I ran a program in the state of Connecticut for over 10 years called the West Rock Youth Diversion Program. And in that program, actually, the program was housed in one of the poorer sections in the city of New Haven in the public housing area called Rockview Circle. I've been doing a lot of gang and teen pregnancy prevention here, not as much here as I have been in Connecticut. However, I'm still very much involved with young people and find a great affinity towards young people. And so I'm happy to involve myself in this discussion to help remedy some of the problems that our young people are faced with.
Thank you. And now to Mr. Menetas.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Anastasios Menetis. I work as a private solo defense attorney in the Atlanta area. So I represent people accused of crimes like DUI and theft, all the way up to rape and murder and felonies like that. And so, I'm humbled to be here, and I'll be glad to, offer whatever might be useful.
Thank you. And Mr. Delamar.
Yeah, good evening and happy Sabbath, everyone. I'm a local attorney here. I represent several federal bureaus. My primary practice area is real estate and, excuse me, civil forfeiture matters and real estate. And my primary background before that had been in civil rights law.
Thank you. And lastly, Chaplain Cox.
Good evening, everyone. Thank God that Jesus saved the best wine for last. I'm Chaplain Stephen Cox, and I've been working with the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office for the past 7 years, providing counseling services to the inmates and the police there, the sheriffs. I'm also the co-founder with my wife, the SAN Transitional Center, also known as Start of a New Day, where we provide secure, supportive, and transitional housing and assisting and facilitating the stability of homeless veterans, ex-offenders, domestic abused women and children who suffer with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, addictions, and domestic violence. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on this platform to share what I can with the people.
And thank you all so much for being here. Truly appreciate your time. And we'll get right to it. Our first question is kind of to get a sense of the gravity of the situations that's going on right now, not only in America, but worldwide. And so I'd like to ask this question about how often do you encounter cases of police brutality, or how often do you come across individuals who have been wrongfully accused in your work or your career so far? How often do you see this? Not just Ahmaud Arbery, not just Breonna Taylor, not just George Floyd.
Okay, so I'll jump right in and have had this discussion. I have worked as a public defender. I have sat on the bench as a judge, and by far, the majority of police officers are fair and are respectable individuals that honor their badge and what it is that they do. There are some outliers, like in any profession, and these outliers sometimes create the chaos that we're seeing now. Is there an unfair judicial system? By all means, yes. Are there more Black and brown individuals being charged with the crimes than we would see our white counterparts? By far, yes. Are there times that you see that the same penalty is not handed out? Is handed out based on color? Yes. And so it's important to understand that these things happen. Right now, we're in heightened awareness, but this systemic, unjust, uneven dissemination of justice is historical. So it's not a new thing. It's because now we have social media, we have live newscasts, we have immediate access to information, that we're seeing it more and more. And we are seeing it in living color because we have everybody's videoing. And so without these social media and these outlets that we have, we would not see it in as paramount as we see it now. Additionally, when folk accused police brutality in the past, there wasn't the video. And so it was a he said, she said. And because it was he said, she said, then very little was done with it. But now we have proof that these things are happening and in living color. So that's why we see it more prominent, and there's a bigger call to action.
If I may, Dana, I just want to expound on the last point that she made. What I find interesting is that though we have a lot of these incidents being caught with cameras, the result is pretty much still the same in terms of the penalty or lack thereof of these officers who are involved in these, in my view, criminal acts. And so, yeah, the only difference is is that it's been made readily visually available. And so, unless and until we address the penalty uh, 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 aspect of the crime, uh, then there's nothing. In fact, that's why there's so much marching. And I participated in a march just yesterday here in Rockdale County, and I was asked to be one of the speakers. And so I, for the most part, address uh, the prevention stage. Attorneys, once it gets to the court, that deals with the aftermath. And so they're complaining, rightfully so, in my view, that still nothing is being done. And so I would love very much, if we can, if time permits, to expound a little bit in that area.
Yes, for sure. We
Yeah.
want to also address how we can take action and then also connect that to the knowledge that we're gaining right now. So thank you so much for sharing that experience.
I'm
Anyone?
gonna, if I can, I'll jump in right here. Um, I've encountered individuals of police brutality and wrongful accusations on a regular basis in my line of duties. I've had individuals in my transitional house, and I currently have individuals in my transitional house who are going through criminal process for crimes that they did not commit. But let me also answer that question with some statistics briefly. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI, recorded data states that since 1973, 156 people on death row have been exonerated, which is about 1.7% of all death sentences. 70% of overturned convictions were the direct result of eyewitness misidentification. It is also reported that 4.1%, or 1 out of 25 people in jails and prisons, are actually innocent. In 2015 alone, 50% of all exonerations happened to be accused individuals that had committed no crimes at all. According to the Innocence Project, 324 people were exonerated by DNA evidence, and 70% of them were people of color. We're talking about wrongful accusations and convictions.
Yeah. And I could probably add to that and go even further that my answer to the question would probably be that it's actually 100% of the people going through the process are treated unfairly, you know, the guilty and the innocent, for a lot of reasons that are connected to race and interconnect with a lot of things. You know, for example, somebody might be, you know, there might be a statute where it's a certain type of murder punishable for a certain amount of time if there's a certain element met. And you see even with these officer murders that they're finally charging, they're taking the time to say, oh, is this really second degree? Is it third degree? Whereas in all of my cases with all these Black defendants, it's just malice murder, first degree on every case, even when it's glaringly obvious that there's no premeditation. And it's so systemic, it seeps into even the rulings of the judges in the Supreme Court. For example, you know, in Georgia, there's been a Supreme Court ruling that says premeditation can be formed in an instant. And so that's abused and leveraged against Black people all the time to take people that, you know, guilty or not, should be charged with manslaughter, and yet they're being charged as a premeditated murder and facing the same, you know, penalty as somebody that planned it out. So there's a lot of things, you know, that are unfair, even not the explicit police brutality and like the explicit racism, but just the whole setup, cash bond, how that affects people. People admit to things they didn't really do all the time. And I have that discussion with people all the time, having to balance their duties to, you know, their principles and themselves and their civil rights against, you know, I got to get out because my kids are going to be taken by defects and I can't afford the bond. So yeah, I'll just say that I did it, or yeah, I'll take the charge, even though it's felony theft, but it should be misdemeanor. And I don't have a chance to, you know, challenge that yet. Even the rights that we do have, I have to have conversations with Black clients about, you know, the composition of the jury and the culture of the jury, and the fact that maybe there'll be someone racist that purposely gets in the jury just to vote guilty, and that we have no chance. And that factors into their, you know, risk analysis of whether to, you know, assert the right to a trial, guilty or innocent. So it's really all over the place, even deeper than the stuff that's on video and the people that are innocent. It's really across the board.
Wow, thank you for these extensive answers. And that leads us right to our next question. about how racial discrimination serves as the basis of these cases. Does it, and how does it do that? And as I was looking into what the works that each of you have done before, some of you not only do with the law in that system, but also educational systems and our medical systems, how is it that racial discrimination is serving in these cases, or if it is at all, or what's the measure of it? How does that look in these situations?
I'll answer that. I think, we have institutional racism, right? So as we talk about the original sin of our country and the founding of the slaves, that they were 3/5 of a human, I mean, systemically, or we call it de jure by law, you have racism, at the very foundation of our country, and it permeates every sector, of our society, in education, in healthcare, in employment, obviously in the criminal justice system. So racism is pervasive in every aspect, regardless of your socioeconomic status.
If I may, we can talk about the problems, and we all know that they exist. So how do we infiltrate these problems? How do we educate the minds of the young Black population to navigate through and around these systems? And so I think that we would do ourselves a disservice if we just spend the majority of this time talking about the problem, and which may ultimately leave us with very little time to discuss solutions. And so for me, I'm reminded of a young man that I spoke to about 2 weeks ago who was embroiled in a little melee. And I pulled him to the side and I said to him, listen, man, you need to be careful because that individual may have a gun. So he said to me, and I found it to be extremely profound. He said, I'm not afraid to die. I said, well, what about your mother? He says, my mother knows me very well. I'm not afraid to die. So if I get killed, I don't have a problem with that. That's what we're dealing with in today's society, that young Black man. And so he becomes an extension of what he sees on a regular basis. And what we, in my view, and this isn't an indictment, but what we need, and I would hope that we would, at the conclusion of this discussion, get to tangible solutions in which we can use these solutions to address, one, where the church needs to go; two, where more Black leaders need to go; three, where our educators need to begin by putting some of our best educators in some of the lower grades instead of putting the best educators in the higher grades, because there seems to be a drop-off point, and particularly with young Black boys, around the third and fourth grade areas. And so if we can begin to touch on those, and I'm not trying to take the conversation here, guys, but if we can begin to touch in those particular areas, I think that we can make tremendous inroads.
Let me just jump in here and say this. I totally agree 100% with my brother that we need to be addressing the solutions as to the issues that plague us within the injustices that we face and challenges that we face in our societies. But we need to understand what those challenges is, and we need to have a clear understanding as to what those challenges is so that we can find the right solutions to those challenges. We got to know the type of problems that exist. And I think that a lot of the information that is being disseminated out there is surface information. We don't really get, down to the root of what the issues are that we're dealing with. And that's why I like to, I believe in statistics. I like to deal with the stats because the stats don't lie. And so let's look at some racial disparities within the criminal justice system. That's what they're asking for. It says overall, so-called white people are statistically less likely to be killed by the police than so-called Black people. So-called African Americans are more likely than any other ethnic groups to have their cars seized and searched through racial profiling. We are 17% of the US population, but we make up 57% of the prison population. The number one charge for Black men in jails is not violent crimes, it's not murder, it's not even drug distribution. We got a judge on the line can probably attest this, but the number one charge for Black men in jails is drug possession. So-called white men are more prone to violent crimes than Black men are. More white men are in prisons for rape, mass murders, manslaughter, domestic violence, pedophilia, molestation, aggravated assault, battery than Black men. But because of strategic, intentional media programming, when you think of violent crimes and drug addictions, the first thing that comes to mind is a Black male. But incidentally, more so-called white people are drug addicts and substance abusers than so-called Black people are. Yet time and time again, where you see the possession and the prosecution is always surrounding the Black male. And Black men are more prone to sit in jail for 1 to 3 years while waiting on trial, either because they can't afford bail, they can't afford an attorney, or they don't understand their rights to due process. Plea deals that are offered to Black men while in criminal process will always include more prison time than reasonable probation and community service, while work release and home monitoring are more randomly offered to whites in criminal process to alleviate them from going to prison. More white men are granted a bail that they can't afford, or they are released on their own recognizance or on a signature bond, while bail for Black men is more excessive, even when it is for the same criminal charge as a white male. And Black men are also more likely to have their probation revoked more than any other ethnic groups over the smallest infractions. And I'm not just giving you statistics that I have researched. I'm also telling you what I have seen, heard, and witnessed with my very own 2 eyes as a sheriff's office chaplain. I've been in a courtroom where a white man was sentenced by a white judge to a 3rd conviction of pedophilia. He was given a 10-year suspended sentence, which equated to no prison time or 10 years probation. While the same judge, I sat there and watched the same judge sentence Black boys for marijuana possession, 1 to 3 years in jail. First time offense, strong arm robbery, sentenced to 20 years in prison. And so we can see the racial disparities through the dissemination of media information, racial disparities displayed in the biases, in the bias and partial courtroom judgments, racial disparities in unfair policing, racial disparities in accessibility to proper representation in court. God help you if you cannot afford an attorney and you have to rely on a public pretender. You got, just in this state alone, you have 137 county and state public defenders right here in the state of Georgia who are managing an average of about 1,000 cases a year. The national standard is 400, and that's a lot. That's already high. How can a public defender, a public pretender, that's what I like to call them, competently represent you with that kind of caseload? And on top of that, the new proposed budget for next year in the state of Georgia for the public defender's office has been slashed from 11 million to $4 million. That's the cutback proposed budget for next year, while the police budget is proposed at 250 million. And so we got to understand what the problems are so that we can find the appropriate solutions to the problems. Another problem that I'm encountering as I go through this judicial journey is with our Black judges. And no offense, I know we got a judge on the line, but truth is truth, especially our Black female judges. They are the hardest when it comes to our Black men. And in my estimation, they should be the most compassionate, because they should be more sensitive to what we go through as Black men in this country as it relates to the effects of slavery. But when I sit in courtrooms and I watch how our sisters deal with our young men, and rightfully so, some of our brothers, they're knuckleheads. I deal with them in my transitional house, rightfully so. But you got to have compassion. You got to have understanding. You got to look at it objectively to see where these guys are coming from, deal with the root of their problem, and not just send them up the river, because they keep reoffending. We got to address the root cause, because sending people to prisons and jails, there's no real essence of rehabilitation when they go through that process. I can tell you, because I deal with them when they come to my house. And I'm telling you that I'm begging the judges to send them to me, because we have a 95 to 99% success rate of transforming these men's life. The judges in DeKalb County have been sending guys to our house on mandatory 90-day in-home stays, and none of them have reoffended, not one. So there is hope for these young men. And I'm telling you that, I'm not just telling you that because I'm telling you that to tell you that I'm also one of those who've been in the system. And I was given a second chance by a judge. You're looking at somebody who should have been in jail for 25 years to life for a crime that I did commit. and I was given a second chance by a judge. So there's hope for these young men.
Thank you, Chaplain Cox. And to give context to kind of why we're thinking more about the information that we should know, it's that we are surrounded by many biases online. We have social media, Twitter, Instagram, all these different sources of media giving us false and convoluted information. And so to hear from professionals who are in the field and witnessing situations every single day, it's important for us to get as much extensive knowledge from you as possible. And so I would like if anyone else has anything to add to this question as well.
Sure, I
I could add
have,
something.
because I got to transition shortly. So if you don't mind,
Yeah.
let me answer your question. So I always say, since we are on a church line, right, you cannot have a secular answer or a secular solution to a spiritual issue. So it is, we can change the laws, we can educate, etc., but it's a heart issue. And until you can change a person's heart, it's just really merely a Band-Aid approach. I drafted an article that was published in a national publication, Operation Reachback, some years ago, addressing these issues. So you have certain things that we can do as a community, as a society. So one of them is to know your rights. I used to have a panel with Joy, and we've gone around to different churches here in the metro area. The ACLU puts out a card. It lets you know your rights when you get stopped. And we're talking obviously in a criminal justice context. When we talk about, we have the right to vote. When you looked at the Ferguson situation and you said you had a majority African-American population, but you had no representation. Shame on us as a community that we were not voting. Since then, they have a black mayor. So we have to exercise our ability to vote. My colleague, who's the defense attorney, can share with you, by you voting, it has an impact on the jury pool. And he mentioned that sometimes you may have a biased juror. Well, if we are voting and now we're part of the jury pool, we can have some ability to influence how justice looks. Obviously, we're getting ready to go into an election season. And so we have that tremendous opportunity now to do that in terms of how we interact with the police. I have this phrase that says, better to have a friend before you need a friend. So there are some ways that we can actually build alliances to law enforcement. And as Joy articulated, most law enforcement are not the issue. We have a couple of rogue officers, and we need to build bridges to those communities to open up dialogue, to influence the training that they have, making sure that they're accountable in terms of civil disciplinary boards. So there are remedies. It's within our power. We just have to organize.
Thank you for those words, Mr. Dumbledore. And if we can get a hold of your article, that would be very resourceful for us as well. Thank you.
Yes.
Dana, excuse me, just briefly before the gentleman departs, he mentioned Operation Reachback. I'm very familiar with Operation Reachback. Dr. Calvin Rock, I believe the gentleman will concur, introduced it. In fact, I was in attendance at the first gathering, I believe it was in Tennessee. I was in Tennessee about 25 years ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. And I posed a question at that forum. And the question was, because Calvin talked about taking resources from the community and spending them in Africa. And the question that I raised was, we have concerns right here in our neighborhoods. So why should we take resources from our neighborhoods and spend them in Africa? That was the question that I raised. And so I'm glad to know that the gentleman has since departed from that way of thinking, I believe, and listening to what he said. But let me just also touch on another point that you made in terms of officers. I would agree that the vast majority of police officers are very decent and professional, but they become complicit with those who are not. Should they not say anything in response to the rogue behaviors of some of those police officers, they too become what they claim not to be. And so if, I understand that there's this family concept in the police department in which one can't snitch, but yet they're encouraging other people outside of the police department to snitch on their friends. And so if they can't snitch within, but they want people to snitch
Sure.
without.
Let me address that. So, and a little bit about my background that, makes me very unique in this. At one point in my career, I worked or interned, with the U.S. attorney. So having a viewpoint of that of a prosecutor, I've done ghostwriting on the criminal defense side with criminal defendants. I've served as a law clerk to a judge where you're actually a neutral. Technically, I still represent law enforcement. I've prosecuted law enforcement for misconduct. My sister was retired NYPD. I have family members who are in the police, on the police force. So I have a very unique perspective, and obviously being a Black man and having had my own interactions with the police, and then obviously being a member of the bar, we can get treated a little bit differently. I give a personal story. This was one that my sister shared with me. And these are the kinds of stories you're never going to see, or you're really not going to really hear much in the news. So there was a situation where one of her colleagues was using excessive force, and she tapped the gentleman, her colleague, and said, "Lighten up." So that officer lightened up. But by the time that she got back to the precinct, as we would say, the poison pill was put out against her, such that she feared for her life. And I'm only learning about these stories recently. She said that she shared her experience. She said, if something were to ever happen to me, to one of our aunts, she alerted her. She didn't want to tell my mother and have my mother be fearful. So that's a situation in which someone went against the blue code of silence and actually fear for her life. So there are officers like my sister who you're never going to hear about who do the right thing. So, and I think that there's maybe a little bit more of those than what we give a little bit credit. You got to look at the media. The media is going to play into a certain narrative because, it sells. Controversy sells. And that's not to say that we don't have rogue police officers, but my sister's story is not one that's going to be often shared.
Yes.
So there are officers who go against that blue wall of silence.
Okay, so let's talk about some solutions. I hear a lot of the issues, and I am my background's in public health also, and so from an epidemiological standpoint, I understand statistics. Let's talk about solutions. What goes wrong? What goes right? In as a public defender and as a judge, I saw things in two different lights. One of the things that I find is that on a lot of these issues escalate on routine traffic stops, and the general public tends to want to fight their cause at the side of the road with the police officer. And that's not the time to do that. And so everyone says, oh, I have the right to say what I want. I have the freedom to do. Yeah, that's really good. But the person that you have the freedom with has a gun. So I need you to calm down, stop being confrontational, take the ticket. At the end of the day, it may or may not cost you some money. And so I was talking to my sister today, and she said she was stopped by a state trooper, and the state trooper asked her, and she asked, well, do you know why you're being stopped? And she said, no. And she said, your tail light is out. And so she asked the state trooper, can I go get it fixed now? And the state trooper said, yeah. And she drove to the nearest AutoZone to get her tail light fixed. She was non-confrontational. She forgot her tail light was out. And she's in a suburb of Baltimore. So she's a Black woman in a predominantly white area, but Baltimore's not exactly the safe haven for African Americans. And so her whole thought process was, let me get through this stop with this police officer as non-confrontational as possible. And a lot of the things that I see that tends to escalate because they want to fight their case on the side of the road. Take the ticket and move on. At the end of the day, whether or not you have the funds or not, it's only money when we're talking about routine traffic stops. Don't respect the office of the police, not the officer. So if you're going to respect that you are dealing with a public servant that has the right to take away your civil liberties by arresting you, and not necessarily the officer and all of their machinations, maybe their attitudes, maybe it's the end of the month and they have to show productivity, which is the buzzword for quotas, but they don't call them quotas, but it's called productivity, and they've got to show that they're out on the street making stops and giving out citations. Respect the fact that they have a job that they are required to do, whether or not you like the fact that you were stopped. Most people are angry when they got stopped by the cops. I can't tell you in the metropolitan Atlanta area where I live, and sitting on the bench, how many times on the bench I heard I was going the speed of traffic. That does not mean you're not speeding, because Atlanta traffic is lead foot. Well, why did they pick the person that was beside me speeding? Because they can't pick everyone. So you're making an argument that is a non-issue. You got chosen. And if you believe it was because you're Black or you're brown or you're driving a fancy car, or the car was red or the car was white, whatever it is that you stood out, it's still, at the end of the day, money. So there is no reason to have this confrontation at the side of the road. While I have the floor, I want folk to understand that the public defenders in the state of Georgia and most metropolitan areas are overworked. But they happen to be the expert in that particular field. And yes, I agree with Chaplain Cox saying that their caseloads are too high, and you're not going to get the kind of care that you would get from Attorney Manetes. Yeah, because you are paying for his time. And when you pay for some time, as opposed to getting the time for free, because it's at no cost to you, the public defender, the engagement with that attorney is a lot different, because my colleague over here cannot get the next client unless he gives excellent customer service. And so, but his fees, you're not paying for his time, you're paying for his expertise. And his expertise is whatever the fee that he wants to charge you. The public defenders are there and they see in and out, and you have a story to tell. One of the things that I tell folk that call me and say, oh, they've gotten to some mishap in Clayton County, DeKalb County, or whatever the metropolitan area, and I say, do you have the funds to hire an attorney? Their answer, 8 out of 10. I'm gonna say 2 out of 20% have the funds to hire an attorney, because their case is going to be pretty much steep. The price is going to be steep. Is that in order to have an effective representation, then assist your public defender in getting those people that can testify on your behalf, those statements from those people, have them down in writing, give names, address, real names. I don't know who Pookie is on the corner. You need to find out what Pookie's real name is, so that you can help your public defender. You need to know, you can't tell them you were at the street behind the McDonald's in X, Y, and Z town. That's not enough information. If you are out on bail so that you can talk to me, that means that you can go into the neighborhood and take pictures so that your public defender has enough information. Yes, the justice system, as you know, caters to folk with money. There's nothing you can do about it. But that's most systems. So when you say, yeah, the public defender's office, and I haven't been a public defender in more than 20 years, So it's not a personal thing to me. I'm trying to tell you that if you want your case to be litigated properly, then you need to take full advantage of the fact that you know this matter better than any attorney would know this case. So if you know that you were with your cousin at a barbecue and there were more than 10 people at that barbecue, get everybody's name in that barbecue to say that you could not have done this crime that you commit. Now, the other piece to this is that um, I had clients that would change their story. That becomes problematic. So if you move on with a case that you would, when you're thinking one theory of the case, because it's a theory, and I would try anything. You put 12 people, 6 people in the jury box, I'm trying it. I just didn't care. I was going to try it. I did not like the fact that a lot of judges were biased because they heard the same situations over and over again. And so I would say, put 6 people in the box for a misdemeanor, put 12 in the box for a felony. I'll try it, but you got to give me one story. And if you change the story, I got a problem. The other thing that I want you to also understand is that judges are usually picked in the community from people that they see in the community, and they normally see prosecutors. So a lot of the judges on the bench are former prosecutors who have their own prosecutorial biases because that's what they saw all the time. So when you're talking about Black females on the bench that had these inherent biases, they are 9 times out of 10 former prosecutors, either federal prosecutors or state prosecutors. I happen to be a defense attorney. So when I heard stuff that sounded like foolishness to me, I took that from the point of view where, as a defense attorney, that sounded like foolishness to me. So my rulings weren't necessarily all that callous, but you have to also understand, we also elected individuals who put in minimum requirements for sentencing for certain crimes. And so when you talk about, I don't know offhand, and maybe my fellow attorney knows what the minimum sentence is for pedophilia. I don't know. But the minimum sentence for an armed robbery charge is 10 years. And so that's what you're dealing with. You have some minimum statutory minimums that have to be sentenced, and you don't have the leeway to not sentence them to those 10 years. So when we're talking about apples and oranges, we're talking about crimes that are statutory minimum. And so, yes, there are some disadvantages there are a lot of disadvantages for Black and brown people, but we can't solve all of those problems in this form. What we can do as a community in order to make sure that the outcome is a good one. Because my objective is for this Black or brown person to go home at the end of a police encounter, and that's the same thing the police officer wants. The police officer wants to go home at the end of the day. And I encounter a police officer, my objective is to go home too.
Thank you, Joy. And continuing on that line of what you were talking about, I think it's great for other panelists to also chip in as to what are essential things that every Black person should know when engaging with the legal system, and then what are some misconceptions that we have, that we hold. So as Joy mentioned, if we are stopped by the police, or knowing our rights when we are being questioned, or what exactly is our power with voting or marching, what are some things that we should know, essential things that we should know in order to effectively take action?
Yeah, I can answer that. I think that the judge and Mr. Jenkins and Chaplain Cox are on to a lot of things. Like what Mr. Jenkins said about education being a big thing. I think education combined with knowing your rights is more ammunition for the public defender to use because of how interrelated everything is. I was also a public defender when I first started, and that's how I learned, everything that I learned back then. And a lot of it happens in these quick 5-10 minute negotiations based on what's in the police report. And so you have way more leverage if the person didn't make a statement, or if they didn't consent to a search, or the mom didn't just drive the child to the police station when the officer promised that he's just going to go right home and he doesn't. And so all of that kind of can also help even a public defender. And I think that I was very good-hearted as a public defender, but as chaplain and judge said, I was in a hierarchy. I was in a political system. I was in a branch that's funded by the government. You know, it's like that's always going to be a concept that's going to be hard, that the state that's prosecuting you is also paying your attorney. And so a lot of that combined is, yeah, there's nothing bad about the public defenders. They actually a lot of times are the most experienced at trial because they go to trial so often and they fought, you know, the most hopeless cases and had to get creative and had to improvise and employ people's families to investigate, as the judge says. And so they know a lot, they just don't, their hands are tied, and there's those systemic things that create problems, but you can help them with the education of knowing your rights. And so that's something that maybe can be a practical solution, is, you know, why that's not part of a elementary school education, to know that, you know, a police officer, you can ask your parents if you, when a police officer comes to try to talk to you, just always call your parents and don't say anything, and don't let them go look in your locker, and don't let them look in your car, things like that. And I also like what the judge said about the anger that people have during the traffic stops. And then sometimes it's that exact anger combined with the ignorance of the law that the officers are so experienced at exploiting for people, because probably the best, angriest, fun thing you could do is stay completely silent, take the ticket like the judge said, and go to court with your attorney. And that's when the tables are turned. And that's where I have a lot of fun, where now you're the one in the traffic stop, you're in the box with an attorney questioning you, humiliating you. You don't get to ask the questions, I do. And then seeing the look on their face when, you know, somebody that asserted one of their rights, and that led to all the officers' work going to waste. If you're angry, that's something that you know would be satisfying. So yeah, putting your anger in the right place through education and awareness, and those would be my three things. I would want to make a joke and say the top three things every Black person should know would be: don't make a statement, don't make a statement, and also not to make a statement. And so and I want to bring that up later in the panel, because that brings up a weird, troubling conflict where those are my real three tips: would not to make a statement, not to consent to any searches, and to just make them use every thing that they have to. For example, if you don't consent to a breathalyzer, it's now not allowed to even be referred to during your DUI, because that's an assertion of your right to remain silent. They can't use your use of your civil rights as evidence of a crime. So they can't even talk about you not doing the breathalyzer. And the officers, yeah, they can maybe get a warrant and get a blood test, but you know, it does help put some pressure on the system. But what I would wonder, what some other panelists think, is I'll sometimes feel like I'm advising Black people to obstruct justice by everybody not, you know, oh, don't say anything, don't say anything. So am I hurting the actual Black victims of crime when so many go unsolved? Or is that just the cost of business of advancing our civil rights by just not making a statement, because that's how things are? And if things improve, then Black people can maybe talk to the police. But right now, there's no reason to trust and for them to do that.
Well, one of the things that we just had in Georgia, and everybody saw it on the television, that we had a gentleman that was shot in the back by a police officer because he had fallen asleep at the window drive-through. One of the things that the 911 operator elicited from the person that called in the complaint was that they believed that the person behind the wheel that was asleep at the drive-through was drunk, under the influence. And one of the things that I see a lot of is that when you are stopped on a DUI stop, and that's what primarily I did when I was in the City Court of Atlanta, a DUI defense, that most people don't know that the roadside tests and the breathalyzer tests at the road, on side of the road, are voluntary. So when they tell you to touch your nose and follow the fingers for the gaze and that kind of thing, you don't have to do that. That would be a no. And no is an acceptable answer. No, thank you. I'm very polite. No, that's polite. And so it's important that folk know what they can and cannot do at the side of the road. It's very important that they know. And I agree completely with my defense attorney. don't answer questions. You're not obstructing. You are um, you know your rights. You have the right to remain silent. Excuse me. And it's important that you exercise those rights because that confrontation resulted in the death of a human being. Um, and they spoke to him for 45 minutes, and then he decided that it was in his best interest to run away. Why the police officer did not, they had his car, they had his name, they knew where he lived. They even knew he had a sister in the vicinity because he was going to walk home. And they chased him with guns drawn. I have no idea why they did that. I don't know why that confrontation escalated. But had he just sat in his car and answered no questions, and he might or might not have gotten arrested. But there was 45 minutes of a police encounter where there was video footage, and he was probably talking up a storm. And so if this had ended in how it should have ended, with an arrest without this violence, he would probably have had the attorney on his case would have probably had a whole lot of statements to go through, whole lot of video to go through, and it probably would not have ended well for him in the context that he would have probably had some criminal convictions, but he would have still been alive. And so it's important to know that these tests on the side of the road are voluntary. And I tell folk all the time, these things are voluntary. On an aside, we bring resource officers into schools, and resource officers are police, to maintain order. If you bring police officers day to day inside the school system, because that's how you're managing unruly and disruptive children, what do you expect how do you expect these children to understand what their parameters are when you are policing them so early? And so we should think about, why are we policing our youth from this early age? Because they already have a negative connotation about that policing in elementary school, junior high, high school. And so they bring that negative connotation from that policing to their adulthood. So we need to think about, what is the efficacy of policing children by using uniformed police officers in the school system? And why is that a criteria now? When I was in elementary school, we didn't have resource officers. When I was in junior high, we did not have resource officers. And I didn't go to public school for long, because I was raised in the Adventist system. But I did go to public school. But as a junior high school student, there weren't resource officers. There were guidance counselors. There were other uniformed personnel that dealt with the unruly. And if you could not be managed or maintained in the normal school environment, then they would have an alternative school for you to go to, which I agree, if you're in an alternative school, you may need some more security and those kinds of things. But we've changed the system that we expose our youth to uniform officers early on.
If I may, Your Honor.
It's just joy.
Yes, Joy. I don't know how old you are, but there's also a uniformed police officer at home waiting with a belt should you misbehave in school.
That's true.
Back in our age, back in our day, excuse me. I don't know how old you are, but certainly back in my day, and that was always prevalent in my ear, my mother's voice, and so so that helped straighten me out. But I just want to touch on something that both Attorney Manette and Joy have been discussing, and that is like knowing your rights and how to behave. And you're both correct. I would agree. But the problem that I see is that we're dealing with uh, a young generation, particularly young black men, who know very little about self. And so this idea that they're now all of a sudden going to be a good student when a police officer arrives, they see the police officer as an anathema, and they've always see police officers that way. And back in my day, we used to have what we call community-based policing, in which police officers actually play basketball and baseball and at cookouts and things of that nature in the communities, but they don't do that as often, or I don't hear much about that. And one of the other issues that I see is that there's this spotlight on the black community as if only black children misbehave. We have white children, and in fact, we have a lot of white children who enter into schools with guns, killing up a lot of white children. And so we don't talk much about that. So we want to give the impression that the problem is it manifests more so in the black community than that of the white community. I am in no way trying to convey black versus white, but I am trying to convey a level of fairness that we need to look at the problem in its totality. Whereas we have the media, we have these video games in which a lot of our young children are very much engrossed in these video games. And in my view, these video games are lending itself to creating, if you will, a type of anger in a lot of our children. And so my grandson, I encourage my daughter to remove these violent video games from him, because a lot of these children, for the most part, children are actors and they act out what they see. They become what's around them. And so if you do not infiltrate these neighborhoods with positive behaviors or models, positive modeling, they don't see that. So then therefore, all they see is something that is negative, and they take that negative reality everywhere they go. And so their response to police officers is never a good one. And so therefore, the police officer is responding, or basically in a lot of cases say, well, I felt threatened, and that's all they have to say to succeed in the courtroom. It's unfortunate, but that does occur. It would seem to me, let me just back up for a moment here. One of the things that I do with a lot of young kids is I always tell them, whenever you buy a stick of gum, always ask for a receipt. A receipt puts you in that place. I wouldn't care how much money you spend, you hold on to that receipt. The receipt will in most cases remove you when they accuse you of being over there when you were on the other side of town. That's what a receipt does. And so I know it sounds somewhat minuscule, but it really has a tremendous amount of validity associated with it. And that's one of the things I always do, is keep all my receipts. And so to expect these young black men to learn the importance of being cordial when approached by a police officer. They don't know their rights. A lot of them don't even know self. And so in order for us, and I think that where you guys are going, I would agree, but we have to figure out how we take this lesson and filter it into the lower grades. And I'm not in no way saying we need to make it a part of the curriculum, but we kind of almost need to at least introduce it on a regular basis, because our young children are growing up, again, modeling the behavior of their older brothers. And a lot of their older brothers, unfortunately, depending upon where you live, are not conducting themselves in ways in which one can find as being admirable. And so I am really bothered with the fact that we have so many young black men incarcerated, so many, and I understand that the system is unfair. I understand that, and I know that the system is unfair, because I had a public, I would agree, Chaplain, pretender. I had a public pretender who who was trying to encourage me to plead guilty. This was about 45 years ago, to plead guilty to a crime that I did not commit. And so I would let him know, listen, I will come to court every single day. I didn't do it. I'm not going to admit guilt. That just didn't happen. And so he noticed that I was relentless and not giving in to his demands in terms of me pleading guilty. And so I guess he must have said to the judge, Your Honor, this guy's not going to capitulate. So let's just throw it out. And they threw it out. And so I would, that certainly would be my approach in speaking with a lot of young men. If you didn't do the crime, never admit to a crime that you did not commit. So I think that we need to take it from the professional and bring it to the community level. So let me end with this. Attorney Mineta, do you, or how often do you, if at all, do pro bono cases in dealing with a lot of young Black men?
I mean, yeah, probably 15% of the caseload, just here and there, that I acquire randomly, actually coincidentally, sometimes through Chaplain Cox and his work. And I try to be as reasonable as I can, because I do know that that is one of the barriers to fairness. And so I try to be as reasonable as I can, but at the same time, as the judge said, it's a private business, and at some point, if I took too much pro bono, I wouldn't have the time to give to each and every client, and I would be back to the public defender trap that they find themselves in. And so, yeah, I do it sometimes, but I don't know. Even I think if even every private attorney committed to a certain level of pro bono work, that'd be great, and I recommend that, and I do that, and I try to get my other attorneys to do that too. That would only go so far, because I think it's just the numbers are so immense in terms of the mass prosecutions and accusations and everything. So that I think education too can help. So, but it's tough, yeah, because like what you said about not admitting if you did a crime or not admitting to something you didn't do, is that there are people that feel that way, and then by their own agency, after counseling, where I don't take a side either way, they do decide to sometimes admit that. And I've had some trials where the person was innocent and he lost, and wishes they could go back and take that probation, because now they're in prison for 40 years. And the system is set up that way to tie the hands of the negotiator and the client, as the determiner of the risk. And then that's just another problem. Yeah, if only there was more pro bono time available, then the public defenders would have more time to give more accurate advice, so that people don't feel the way that you felt of, oh, I'm being pressured to make a decision without my informed consent. With some more time and some more pro bono stuff and more education, they could make the decision for themselves, which I think should be the ultimate goal, really, of every case. So the attorney isn't deciding that the defendant is deciding, but that they're also doing it with the knowledge of the odds and what they're up against and some of the unpredictability of the system. But they need counseling for that, like you said, and that counseling costs money, and that's one of the ways that the system sort of keeps people down.
Let me publicly commend Attorney Menetis. He's been a godsend to our organization, a true blessing to myself and the young men that he has been assisting us in defending. Attorney Menetis, I would say, is one of the most competent attorneys that I have met. He's not in it for the money. He's in it with his heart. He's in it wholeheartedly, not just trying to take a client and deal them out, but I've watched Menetis, and he'll look for every single loophole available to competently represent his clients and get them off. And I truly thank God for him and for that. And a lot of the cases that he takes from my end, nowhere near what the client should be paying. And he's actually representing a couple of people from our churches. And he's been doing an excellent job as we work together. And I always tell him this, because we when we go to court, we go under that spiritual covering. And we're not losing any cases because this is a spiritual fight, spiritual warfare. And I always tell my residents that Our cases are won before we even set foot into that courtroom. The Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and spiritual wickedness. There is nothing good about the judicial system. There's nothing positive about that system, the current system that we have. And I've been listening to Attorney Joy, and I've been listening to Minetta speak, and I appreciate the level of knowledge as attorneys that they share collectively between them. But I've seen in my experience and dealing with the judicial system, let me back up. I've actually advocated for several people in court as a non-lawyer, just represented them in my official capacity as a chaplain, going to court with them and advocate for them. After extensive research and studying the rules, the criminal and civil procedures, going into the court, spending extensive hours listening to cases, watching the judges, watching the prosecutors, watching the attorneys, and counseling with judges and counseling with attorneys, prosecutors. And the problem is really the system. We have a lot of good people that want to do the right thing within the courtrooms, within the public defender's office, within the prosecutor's office. But because we're dealing with a system that is a performance-based, quota-driven system, a commercial system, the bottom line is this is all about money. It has nothing to do with finding people's innocence or, when you look at how even the language that they're using within the courtrooms, it's all trickery, It's more terms than words. You see a judge ask a person, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty? And innocent is not even an option. Why is innocent not an option? Why is it guilty or not innocent? Why is it guilty or not guilty? Because they're using terms and not words. This is a fictitious system that we're dealing with that is tricking you and deceiving you into incriminating yourself pretty much to generate revenue for the system. That's all it is. I have had judges who I've counseled with privately. One judge came to me, he was crying, came office, he was in tears. I said, what happened, Judge? He said, man, he got called in by the chief judge. And the chief judge told him, we've been going over your evaluation and you have the highest percentage of dismissals. And he said, well, if they're innocent, I got to let them go. The chief judge told him, nobody's innocent. In other words, go collect that revenue. See, this is the mandate that's coming from the county commissioners all the way down through the system. You got good police officers who are out there in the streets trying to keep the peace. And that's a whole nother topic when it comes to dealing with police officers and the true position of police officers, because this is all about policy enforcement. It's not about protecting the constitutional rights of the people. You get police officers, they go to the academy, they raise their hand and say, I swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, all enemies, foreign and domestic. But yet they're out here giving people, pulling people over for, like the judge said, a broken tail light. You can tell somebody, listen, that's a safety issue. Just get it fixed. Why are you escalating these things to an arrest? Because it's all about getting money. The higher the charge, the more the revenue it generates. That's what this is about. And so you got prosecutors who are stressed out because of a performance-based system. They gotta have convictions if they want to get to the next level. The public defenders, they have a small budget, a caseload, all right? I've advocated for young men who were charged with crimes like criminal trespass I don't understand how a police officer can trespass you for somebody else's property, right? And the public defenders are making people take plea deals and getting probations and getting in the system when they could defend that case. There is no person coming to court with a title to say this person was in my property and I trespassed. You got police officers driving around, see somebody in an abandoned building and lock them up, arrest them and charge them with trespass. And you got public defenders represent. I've even seen private attorneys representing people with simple trespass and getting convicted, making their clients take deals. And I, a non-lawyer, have been to court several times and assisted. There's a lady listening online right now who I've advocated for her and her son for the same criminal trespass and got the case dismissed, a non-lawyer. And not only criminal trespass, my wife is online, she's a witness. We've been in court with felony cases, theft by receiving. We did all the motions, filed it myself in court, went to court, got it dismissed as a non-lawyer. And the reason why I'm glad that I have somebody like Menendez, because we have certain cases that is required to be argued, and we need a lawyer to go in, a bar car holder to go in and stand before the judge and competently represent the client. But we're dealing with a performance-based system. That's what this is all about. It's not about finding people's innocence. It's not about a judge sitting on the bench or a prosecutor who really cares about this person. It's not that. You might have good intentions and you might have a good heart and you might want to do the right thing, but at the end of the day, you have somebody that you're accountable to, that you have to perform. And if you're not performing, it's either you're not going to sit in that seat again, or you're going to find yourself on the unemployment line. All right. That's what this is all about. Let me just jump in. Let me just jump in. I agree with the judge and Menendez. Just want to share a couple of things about solutions. I think that every Black and white and brown person should read and know the first 10 Bill of Rights, especially the Fifth Amendment, right, which protects you from self-incrimination. As Brother Jenkins says, we as leaders, we need to hold ourselves first accountable by educating ourselves as to what's really going on within the system. And then we need to teach that to our sons, our daughters, and teach that to our congregants. I think that we need to know the Bill of Rights. Everybody should know at least the first 5 so-called Bill of Rights. I call them so-called Bill of Rights again, because that's another farce. All this stuff is all, constitutional, fictitious nonsense as far as I'm concerned, because ultimately we have inalienable rights. We have God-given rights. The right to remain silent is a God-given right. You can shut up or you can talk. That's not a constitutional right. It's a corporate, legal, fictitious contract. And this is something that we can get in this very deep. I've counseled with so many people who could have avoided prosecutions and convictions if they had just kept their mouth shut. And Menendez would agree. The second thing is know the laws of your state. Know what the police have the authority to do and what not to do. And also know what you have the right to do and not to do. Know the types of warrants that gives police access to your homes. Right now, we're assisting people who let police come in their house and serve them civil warrants. And all they had to do was not answer the door. And now they got outstanding judgments. We got to be, I've taken pastors to court to assist clients who we were assisting with paperwork as a non-lawyer. And that's the disclaimer. I'm not doing this. We just provide information. We help assist as a non-lawyer. And we've gotten cases dismissed even after they were served civil warrants, because you got a lot of playing the game again in court. We sit there, we watch them. That's how I know how to beat them, because you got a judge, you got a defense attorney representing a client who's not even in the courtroom. And everybody's going along with this charade. You got the defendant incriminating himself. The judge is not saying anything about it, right? The defense attorney is speaking and testifying for a witness who's not even present in the courtroom. All hearsay and allegations. And the judge is going along with this whole charade. They would make a plea deal with the defendant, the lawyer, and the defendant, and they would present that to the judge. And then they would play the game and convict that person. They got to pay money. That's what this is about. All right. Know the different types of warrants. The only warrant that I would allow anybody to come in my house with, the judge can correct me if I'm wrong, is a search warrant or an arrest warrant. And even in that, with an arrest, with a search warrant, you got to read it, make sure it's signed by a judge, and make sure it details where they can search. Because it's a search warrant, it gives them the right to search all areas and aspects of your house. All right. So know the types of warrants that they have. Don't just open your door because the police say, I got a warrant. They got different types of warrants. A lot of people could have avoided judgments and garnishment had they not opened their doors to the police. Everyone should know your state and local laws, especially if you're driving. Always tell my young people, if you're driving, you better know the rules to the game if you're going to get behind the wheel, because you're not going to win an argument with the police on the side of the road. The police have the full faith and authority of the state. They have a gun. They have a badge, they got handcuffs, they got mace. You're not going to win with the police, all right? You want to be able to assert your rights without incriminating yourself and escalating the situation, as the judge says. But you also want to comply with the officers. I always tell my boys, you live to fight another day. Get through the traffic stop and then hold these officers accountable if they violate your rights. This is what we need to know. We can hold them accountable. We can go to the precincts. You can file report. Give them a record, just like they want to give you a record. That's going to come back to haunt them someday. Look at all the police officers that are messing up. Now they're digging up their files and they say they had all these blemishes in their records, which show that this was characteristic of this individual. All right. So give them a record. We can hold the judges accountable. We can hold the lawyers accountable. We can hold the prosecutors accountable. There's accountability for everybody. And we need to know that. You can call me on the side and I can tell you how to do it. All right. But never be confrontational with law enforcement. You never win. And thirdly, stay out of their courts. Follow the rules. That's what I tell all my boys. Follow the rules. If you get caught up in the system, it could cost you a whole lot of money and time. And you could also lose everything, including your family. You're not going to win in court. You're not going to win because this is not about justice. This is not about what this is about revenue generation. This is a commercial system that you're dealing with. That's the bottom line. It's all about money, right? I have seen, and this stuff that I'm telling you is stuff that I'm privy to because of what I do and what I'm exposed to. I've seen conviction reports with individuals in court, if you call it a conviction report, where it has the conviction sheet, where there's a breakdown that part of the proceedings for that case is going towards the judge's retirement plan. So why wouldn't it be in the judge's beneficial interest to convict you and send you up the river? These are things that they're not telling the lawyers, they're not telling the public. And all of these things is playing a factor in why we have a jail full with only Black men. And then you got to deal with the 13th Amendment. And you got to go back to the system again. This is all the system that's at work that allows involuntary servitude in felonious convictions. That's a travesty. So now you got another gateway for slavery, revenue generation, bonds. You got the phone system, privatized prisons. It's in everybody's beneficial interest to lock us up because a lot of people are making money, and you can only keep judges and prosecutors employed if you got bodies inside of the jail cells. You can only keep police paid if you got bodies inside the courthouse, inside the prison cells. As far as the police officers, that's a whole nother story. Police departments are corporations. A police officer is not even an official representative of the people. To me, the only qualified representative of the people is a sheriff who's elected by the people for the people, the sheriff. Somebody asked me what I would have done if I if I was there with that George Floyd situation, if I was on the scene. And I'm watching these Black men holding the camera and videotaping the police, right? Put his knee on a Black man's neck. And I'm telling you, we as Christians, we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. I'm telling you that we got to be willing to give our lives, lay down our lives is what I'm telling you for righteousness' sake. I'm not telling anybody to go out there and interfere with a police investigation or get yourself killed. That's not what I'm telling. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, for me, I know that I could not have been on the scene with the information that I have and just sit there with a videotape. Allowing this man to step on this man's knee. And that's why it's important for us to educate ourselves and educate the public, educate our members in the church. We could have at least, somebody there could have had at least mobilize 15 of those same big Black men that were videotaping and say, listen, we're going to execute a citizen's arrest on this officer because he is now operating outside of his oath. He's about to take this man's life. He's not protected by his oath anymore. That's a violation of his oath. And I'll tell the police officer what we're going to do. I'll make a disclaimer before we say, if you don't get off that man's neck, the 15 of us, the 20 of us, we're going to put you under a citizen's arrest. And the state says you have the authority to do that. A peace officer or any citizen has the right to execute a citizen's arrest in any felonious condition. Because if you don't and you sit there, all those people that were videotaping, they should have been arrested for that man's murder as well, is what I'm telling you. And they could have been. Isn't that what they do if you go with your buddy and your buddy leaves you in the car and he goes inside and he robs somebody and kills them and then gets in the car and drive away with you? Don't they charge you with the same crime? But see, they ain't gonna tell you this when it comes to the police, because the perception is that's the law. And there's nothing that you can do when it comes to the police, when it comes to the prosecutors, when it comes to the judges, when it comes to even the private attorneys. But you can call me on the side and I'll tell you what you need to do to hold everybody accountable.
Thank you, Chaplain Cox. That answer was very informative. And hopefully next week we can dive into more of how to deal with these situations on a practical level. And I also wanted to allude to something that Brother Jenkins mentioned earlier. So what can we who are listening, are Black Christian people, churchgoers, what can we do to prevent, well, first of all, to advocate for fellow brothers and sisters in our communities, so we can do some steps before we have to appear before Judge Walker, or we have to utilize Attorney Manises? What can we do in our community right now on a practical level?
Yeah, I could answer that real quick about one thing that Brother Jenkins made me think of earlier with the comment about receipts, is that I have something good for you, for the new generation, is cell phones, which is actually like having billions of receipts all in you all the time. So the probably one practical tip, because I like that receipt comment, is to always keep the actual phones that you had at a time, because you can download them and you could have forensic analysts go into it and show every app that you used and the location and what time and where you were, even as you're driving around, and Bluetooth or Wi-Fi devices attempt to connect to your phone. That's recorded in the cache of the computer of the phone. And it's actually really incredible what you can get out of a phone in terms of exoneration and alibi evidence. And a lot of times it's understandable that something accusation might have happened a long time ago. You don't have the phone, but if you don't, the most practical thing is to hold on to your original phones all the time. But the next best thing would be to at least remember what phone number you were using at the time, because you can subpoena the cell phone provider for your cell phone records. And that's not nearly as good as the actual physical phone, but that can at least get you the cell tower that was used every time you made a call or every time you made a text, not the content of the text. That's why you need the original phone. But with the cell phone calls that you made, I've had plenty of cases where the person knew the number they had at the time. You subpoena the cell phone company, it shows their name as a subscriber, and it shows the cell phone tower they used at the time when they made certain calls, which sometimes are at the same time as the accusation, and can show that you're in a different spot. So keeping track of your phones and what phone numbers you had at the time, that's one just little practical tip that can help your attorney protect you.
I would say fear and I'm sorry, Brother Jenkins, I'll let you go.
Ahead.
I would say fear and ignorance, the misconception that you are powerless over your situation, which is mostly caused by the lack of knowledge. We need to always have an accessibility of information and resources at our hands, especially the church. I don't understand how, for the life of me, you can have an organization, and if a member is in trouble, they don't know who to call. But yet we say we're the remnant and we got the truth. And you got your members in church and you call in the chaplain. You don't know who to call. I don't get that. So we need to always have access to information. We need to be available to people, professionals who understands the system, knows the system, who can give us sound legal advice, and not just trying to gain a client to generate revenue. Right. We can create a directory of competent, knowledgeable professionals. I work with Attorney Manises, and he is by far one of the most competent 5-star rated attorneys that I've ever met. and there's not a lot of people out there that you can put your hands on and say, look, man, I can hire this young man, and I know that I can sleep comfortably knowing that my life is in good hands. And you need to know that. We need to know that our life is in God's hands, but we need to know that God is working through somebody who is competent enough to get the job done.
Amen. Thank you, Chaplain Cox. Actually, I know, Judge Joy, you had a comment to make. We'll just let you.
One of the things that I found on both sides of the bench is that the vast majority of individuals in our prison system are not educated. They don't have a high school education. And so one of the things that we can do as a community is to have mentorships and to get into the public school systems and the like to educate, to make sure that our people, our folk, our children are educated. And so That's really important. If Chaplain Cox's statistics will probably show that the 85% of the folk in the jails they've been in jail for a considerable amount of time are not high school,
Literate, yes.
The other thing to it is that the degeneration of the Black family has a big role in the criminal justice system, because that same statistic will show you that quite often the folk that are in jail, Black and brown, do not come from a two-parent family.
Mm-hmm.
Things that we need to be more community, more village oriented, so that we look out for our neighbor, so that we don't have our children unsupervised, taking care of themselves, being latchkeyed, meaning at the libraries and those kinds of things when their parents are at work. I am not denigrating the single mother, but the single mother that is trying to raise upstanding members of the community. But it's important to note that you can't do this by yourself, and so that community needs to be involved. When I sat on the juvenile court bench in DeKalb County, one of the things that I saw that was predominant in that arena is that the white families would come in with their attorneys, with their psychologists or their psychiatrist notes, with having gone and gotten some therapy, gotten them on their medication. They would come in there, all the I's would be dotted, T's would be crossed. And the Black families, if their mothers were available, mother was in house shoes and was just happy to, just because she had to be there. She, tired from working or whatever, they just get to court, not prepared, have not listened to their public defender. The private attorney is outside because the grandmama or auntie paid for the private attorney, looking outside, trying to figure out why their client is not on time to court, and all the bad impression on the things that are going on in court. So you need to take any encounter with the court system seriously. If you need an attorney and they are offering public defenders, that educated public defender is is a lot better than your uneducated, untrained television knowledge of the law. So take that public defender, even if you are mistrusting them. And I understand the mistrust. This is not a television world. We do not solve crimes in an hour. But take that person who has been at school and has learned the legal system, and take whatever help that they give you and listen. I always told my client, either you're going to listen to me and follow my theory of the case, or you're going to represent yourself. The two of those things cannot happen. There are a lot of information that folk get in and from the jailhouse. It's very interesting because jailhouse lawyers can get you some more time. I don't think people understand that. Those jailhouse lawyers that think they've been around the system often enough know the system. Coincidentally, they're in jail with you. So how much do they know the system? So you need to be careful about getting that jailhouse lawyer, and hire somebody or use somebody who's as a public defender or on doing it pro bono to help you with your case. One of the things that you have to expect in the criminal justice system, that if you did do something wrong, there is a good chance that there will be an outcome that you don't like. It's not an attorney's, a defense attorney's position to help you escape consequences. It is the defense attorney's job is to make sure the state proves their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They're not supposed to be finding loopholes. They're not supposed to be finding ways to get around it. They're supposed to represent you zealously and have the state prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt with the bounds of the laws that are surrounding your procedures and the rule of law and those kinds of things. So if you're thinking that I am going to speed and my attorney's going to get me off, I'm happy for you. That's not the attorney's job. The attorney's job is to make sure you have the best possible outcome for whatever's going on. I understand that if you didn't do the crime, that's a whole different story. And so if you believe that you should not have been stopped or pulled over because what you did was not really, in your estimation, breaking the law, that's a whole different story. We have to get your mindset in the fact that yes, I was going above the speed limit, but I don't want the penalty to be $200 to $300 to $400 that the state can, in fact, charge me for speeding. I want something less. That's what your attorney can help negotiate. With all due respect for all the valued opinions here, that is not an attorney's job. I know Attorney Menendez is working judiciously, zealously to represent his clients, but what he's trying to do is to make sure that the state approves their case and that his client gets a good result. And that's what he's supposed to do. And so he has to be conscientious about that, but he has ethics. His ethics does not allow him to proffer evidence, proffer information that is not truthful and is not within the bounds or illegally obtained. He's got those ethics. I know he thinks his license, as I did at his age, because I know he's way younger than I am, is worth at least $10 million in his lifetime. And what he's going to do is protect that license by doing everything he can do ethically. And if he doesn't represent his client zealously, if he does not represent his client professionally, then that speaks to the fact that he's not going to have a license in a while, and after a while, because we weed out those kinds of attorneys. But with that said, you need to understand that it takes a village, and our village needs to be looking out for those single parents and those kids that are about to drop out of school, are not doing well in school, are not being mentored in school, so that we can grab them while they're younger. I know you all have heard the statistic that jails are built by the test scores gotten in third grade. You know how old they are in third grade? Eight, right? They're 8 years old. So they're looking at 10 years after 8 years old, which is 18, which is where they want to put you in jail. So you need to understand that you need to start working with your children, working with your group of your village earlier, so that we don't have those folk that are not educated, that are not employed, that are not where they're supposed to be at the right times of day, so that we cannot put ourselves into the position where we are a target of racism, our target of this unjust, broken judicial system, because there's no rehabilitation worked into our justice system. This is not a rehabilitative. We don't have enough resources to rehabilitate. So Chaplain Cox is right. This is not a just legal system, but it's the best one we have. So now we've got to figure out what to do so that we don't become a part of the criminal justice system, and we need to start young.
Thank you.
Let me just jump in here real quick. Let me jump in real quick. Gotta jump in.
No, well, if I may.
So if you have a comment, please, I'm sure it can be inserted in some of these questions from the audience. And from moving on forward, since we are limited on time, we do have a part 2, but since we're limited on time, we can probably condense the answers a little bit more.
No, I just want to respond to your question, Dana, the question that you put before us.
Right. It's just our audience has questions. And I just
in regards to what the church can do.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Please. Yes.
Yeah, that's where I am. In regard to what the church can do, let's just take a look at the church holistically. You're there on Sabbath, you're there on prayer meeting, and we no longer use the building. And so we have a community that's out there languishing. We have children who are trying to sort out behavioral problems, but yet we have a building that isn't being used, with the exception of twice a week. In order for these young Black boys to be elders, they need to see elders. And so when we look at the church, this isn't an indictment on the church. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. This is all, not just the Adventist church, but churches in general. Young people do not see Jesus as being relevant in their life. And so how do we change that paradigm? And so we as adults, we spend more time on the inside than we do on the outside. And so we need to find out what's going on in these communities. And how do you do that? You do it by spending time in the communities. And it's more than just passing out tracts. I'm not against that. I'm not against that at all. But it's about developing relationships with the community, developing relationships with these families so that they can see us. And so that when we speak to these issues that they're dealing with, if you follow an uneducated child home, an uneducated parent will open the door to let their child in. And so we have to address it again holistically. If we don't address it holistically, then we're failing. And so when we have these parents who live right across the street from a lot of our churches, and yet we don't spend much time over there, or we may put up a banner because we have a certain speaker that's coming in. Somehow we think that they're going to flock to our church to listen to this speaker. That just doesn't work. Build the relationships in these communities. And when we can build these relationships by creating all boys programs, all male programs, so that these young brothers who don't have relationships, a lot of them don't have relationships with their fathers. They have never, ever had a relationship with their fathers. But there's a lot of positive Black men in our churches who should adopt these young children and be those surrogate fathers for these young Black boys, so that they would understand how to be a father. My mother once told me, she said, son, I wouldn't care if you have absolutely no relationship with the mother of your children, or even if you hate her. You just better be there for your kids. And that is something that our young Black boys know nothing about. And so our churches, instead of us coming together for these revivals on these certain speakers coming in, we need to have regularly symposiums, if you will, in addressing the community and figuring out how we as a church, and if we don't know the answers, let's go get the answers. Let's find people and let's bring these people in, because a good leader will always go out and find what they don't have in order to achieve what they need to achieve. That's what a good leader would do. And so I see our church as being a failure in regards to addressing the community. Now, some folk may disagree with that. Well, we have a message, and the message that we have, I agree with. But in terms of what we're doing outside of the building, it's an abject failure. And unless we as a Black church understand that we're losing generations of young Black children because of our inability to reach into those communities, because in order for us to understand the world that these kids live in, we must understand the world that they are in. And that is what is important, because children are smart. They know when you're being spurious. They know if you're genuine. They're very smart. They're very wise. And so we must come together as a Black church and understand that. When we look around in our churches, we see so many, the pews are empty, or we see older people. Where are the youth? Well, you don't see the youth because you do nothing and you have nothing for the youth.
Dana, I need 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That's all I need.
30 seconds.
All right. I want to say that I agree with Judge Joy in that we need to work with the Public Defender's Office. But we need to work with the Public Defender's Office with the understanding that the public defenders, they don't have the resources. Their hands are tied to the system. They don't have the resources to really fight on your behalf. And so 97% of your cases are going to be plead out with the Public Defender's Office. When it comes to, and that's a legal loophole, by the way, when it comes to lawyers, a lot of people are intimidated by them and they leave them to do everything for them as it relates to their case. One of the biggest legal blunders I see people make is to hire an attorney and not be a part of the process. I think that every client should know just as much or even more about their case as the lawyer. After all, it's your case. You don't have to know all the legal dynamics in the case, but you need to be fully involved and invested in the process. Don't just hire a lawyer, whether it be a private attorney or an appointed public defender. Don't just allow them to, to just run your case and leave everything into their hands. I've seen so many people get screwed by lawyers who they left everything up to them, were not a part of the process. And judges are lawyers also. And I've seen a lot of people screwed by judges. Judge Joy, I love you, but when it comes to loopholes, the court is using fraudulent conveyance of language. That's one of the biggest loopholes to convict people. The courts are using all this Latin and legalese and confusing people and using terms instead of words, guilty or not guilty, meaning can you pay now or can you pay later? Because when a defendant goes before the judge and says not guilty at arraignment, they keep them in process 2-3 years, bring them back 2-3 years later after intimidating them and driving fear in them that if you try to take this to trial, especially with a public defender, you're going to blow trial and we're going to throw the book at you. And so they put pressure on that defendant to take a plea. So that's one of the biggest legal loopholes that there is. Fraudulent conveyance of language and confusing people with terms instead of words. I believe that every officer of the court, including the judges under the system, should be charged with malfeasance for doing this. But, again, this is a part of the engine that we're dealing with, and we need to address the system, not just, I'm a non-lawyer, so I can talk about legal loopholes. Maybe it's unethical for the attorneys on this venue to talk about legal loopholes, but I'm saying that the court is using a lot of legal loopholes. It's implied, it's very implicit in the courtrooms. I can take you for a tour. We can sit in the court and I can show you a lot of legal loopholes that's being used by the prosecutors, the public defenders, the judges, and the attorneys at the demise of the citizens.
Thank you. And we're going to move now to some questions from our audience members who have tuned in. This question says, keeping in mind the incident that resulted in the death of Breonna Taylor, what should we know about rights we have in our own homes when law enforcement comes to our doors? How does the no-knock warrant work? I know you probably addressed some of those before. Any specifics that you'd like to add to that answer?
I can try to answer that. That's a really tough question because that's sadly like the George Floyd situation where there is nothing that could have been changed when you're just murdered in your sleep or when you comply and you're just, strangled on the street. There's nothing like that. So that's a hard question. But as far as more practically, I would say anytime an officer tries to knock at your door, and they say, may I look inside? They're just trained to psychologically, prey on your vulnerabilities and some of our human instincts to talk to people and to go along and, social desirability and keep the status quo and, to not realize that, yeah, you do have rights. And just to go back real quick to the whole public defender thing, just for the record, I do think that you can get a good result with a public defender combined with the education of, like Brother Jenkins said, you have the full control. And while it is a charade, as crooked and corrupt as it gets, part of that charade is the judge bringing you out and asking, do you agree to this or not? So you can play off of the fiction for your own benefit and say, no, I want you to go look at this. I want you to talk to him. And nothing can keep going unless you say, yes, I want you to do this. Yes, I want you to look at these warrants, stuff like that. And that's one of the things, ask to look at a warrant. If someone knocks on your door, don't consent to anything, because that's also part of the way that the system takes advantage. It considers any consent to be a waiver of your rights. So if you just say, yeah, sure, you can come in, this is no big deal. I'm just looking for something. And yet the officer is in there looking for the PlayStation that was stolen, or something to incriminate, who knows? So definitely, as far as the Breonna Taylor situation, I don't think there's anything we can do, and that's for, to address in other ways. But as far as what we can do, it's, to assert your rights, to demand that you see warrants, to not give a consent for anything. And also those type of stories remind me that maybe we should be a little on the more aggressive side, because if we can comply and still, be killed, then why not assert your rights and make them do everything the right way? And, sometimes the word loophole is getting thrown around in a weird way. I mean, loophole can mean that they went in your trunk when they need to have a warrant to go in the trunk. And so to get a case dismissed for someone that's guilty because the officer did something he wasn't supposed to do, I don't think is really a loophole. That's just a way to make the system accountable And, they would never do that to a white person. I've been pulled over many times, never had my trunk gone into without any of my consent, never had my car even asked to be searched. And so you can just deny, any search, and that will help you, because like I said, yeah, they consider any kind of waiver. If you allow them to come into your home, you can't challenge the fact that they used bad information to get that warrant. And so I think that'd be the biggest thing, is to always, stand your ground with the public defender and make sure everything's done by your consent. And also same thing with the police, and just refuse, consent as far as you can. Their biggest thing, my last thing about all that practically would be, the script is, they're trying to talk to you. You should only say one thing, and that is, am I under arrest? And if they say no, then you ask to leave the encounter, and you say, okay, I don't want to speak right now, but give me your card and I'll call you later when I can, and just never call them. Or I just don't want to talk right now, may I go? If they try to say anything else, like, oh no, it's not fine, you're not in trouble, we just want to talk to him, we just want to see something, it's not a big deal, it's actually about some other murder that you're not even about, which there's a Supreme Court case that says they can lie to you. They can tell someone that, we found a dead woman and your DNA is inside of her, when that's actually completely a lie. And they can use that sometimes to make handicapped people admit to things they didn't do. So keep in mind that they can lie. And so don't say anything when they try to avoid that question. If they say anything besides yes or no, when you say, am I under arrest? You just ask, am I under arrest again? If they say yes, you immediately say, well, I want to talk to an attorney. And it's literally like magic words later with us and the judges. If you asked for an attorney, there's things that can help you. And if you don't, there's things that can hurt you. So it's am I under arrest? If they say yes, you just immediately say, I want to talk to an attorney. Don't say anything. If they say no, you ask to leave. And if they say anything else after that, you go back to the top of the script and say, well, so I'm not free to leave then. If they try to say anything else, he's like, ask if you're free to leave, and then ask if you're under arrest. And if you are, ask for an attorney. So I think that's the safest way to protect yourself as far as warrants and searches and things of that nature. And yeah, that's probably it. Ask if you're under arrest, and ask to leave if you're not. Ask for a lawyer if you are, and that's it.
Just so I can continue the discussion on these no-knock warrants. No-knock warrants are in fact what they say they are. The officer does not have to knock to come into your door. Those are under special circumstances, or should be under very special circumstances. And with Breonna Taylor, they had a no-knock warrant, but it wasn't for her. So that was just erroneous policing at the end. But there isn't anything that you can do with a no-knock warrant, because that is completely out of your control. I can tell you that if you do encounter something like a no-knock warrant, then you need to make sure that your movements and your words, anything that you do in that encounter is as non-threatening as you possibly can. But with these no-knock warrants, you are at a complete disadvantage because you have no control. So, like I said, the Breonna Taylor was just a travesty of policing, but that's and it's happened here in Atlanta, where they shot up a home where there was a grandmother that was there and a no-knock warrant. And it was actually the wrong home. So that does happen, but there's nothing, unfortunately, that you can do about that.
Excuse me. Yes, there is something that you can do about it. You can outlaw them. Okay, that's what you can do about a no-knock warrant. You can outlaw them. The case, Breonna's case, is certainly a case that one can make as to the reason why you should outlaw them. There's a woman who's laying home in the bed with her boyfriend. They knocked her door down and killed this woman. So when you say there's nothing that they can do about it, yeah, outlaw them. Just like, and you also cited another case about a senior citizen. They rented to the wrong house. Outlaw them. It is egregious for us to have laws that allows someone to just knock your door down. And you said, Joy, that you should just relax and just basically allow them to come in. If they come in my house, a no-knock warrant. If they come in my house, I don't know who the person is. If they come and knock down my door, I have something waiting for them on the other side of that door, because I must protect my home. And so I'm in no way threatening anyone. But it would seem to me that a no-knock warrant and you don't mention who you are, to me, I'm thinking this is a criminal breaking down my door, trying to get it to my family. And so I must defend myself. So for me, they should be outlawed.
And I think that goes to
And
voting and participation.
I'm
And
sorry, we're definitely at an ending point, but we hopefully can continue this conversation next time. I want to thank all our panelists for being here and all the insight that you did share. Next week, since we did focus a lot this week on how we as Black individuals and what we could do, exercising our right, knowing our rights, how we can put that into practice. Next week, we also want to transition to how, as a church, we can train ourselves and then open our walls in a way that advocates for our community with more practical solutions. So hopefully also we can just kind of also answer these concerns that we had from this week as well. This point, what we'll do is we'll just leave it as having a charge from our chaplain. For the other panelists, if you would like to stay on, that is okay too, but you are free to go right now. But thank you again for your time. Hopefully we'll see some of you next week. And we'll also have some new faces next week for those who are tuning in. And just once again, thank you for the time and resources that you shared.
I'm going to give Attorney Menendez 1 minute and Judge Joy 1 minute of my time. So I'll give you guys 2 minutes. And I want you guys to jump in and address what Brother Jenkins, you wanted to piggyback on that. And then I'll go ahead and close. Go ahead.
No, I just want to remind everyone to vote so that the laws for no-knock warrants can change and that you don't take that particular position that you are going to defend yourself. But the only way that you can change no-knock warrants is to vote. And those people that you put in office are the ones that do the laws. So we've got lots and lots of primaries, and we have the national voting in November. So make sure you vote.
Menendez, you got one minute of my time.
yeah, no, that was gonna be my comment as well, that there's multiple ways we can do. We all have our own lanes to make progress. And one thing we all have is, voting, educating ourselves, making money for ourselves and our family, and getting into positions of power. And eventually, then once there is some accountability, and that's, how people's voices are heard, then I think that a reasonable debate probably would outlaw no-knock warrants, and they should be outlawed. But the only way to do that is to vote and to educate ourselves and to pursue careers in the law.
All right, with that said, it is Marcus Garvey that said, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. If you have no confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life. Brothers and sisters, this country has shown us that Lady Justice is blind. But if justice was not blind, why would you blindfold Lady Justice? For who puts a blindfold on a person that is supposed to be already blind? I think that is kind of cynical. And so you can march all you want, you can throw stones and seek to create economic resistance in the white man's world of a supremacist society. But after all that is done, you will still continue to dream the American dream, but live the American nightmare. As long as you are seeking their approval and not doing for yourselves, you will continue to dream. As far as the church, they are now trying to address the external issues of racism and social injustices. But until the church starts to address, deal with, and remove its own internal issues of racism, until the church learns the way of the cross, and that is the way of Jesus, Yeshua, Jesus the Christ, who came to proclaim liberty to the captives and open the prison doors to them that are bound, until we, the people, learn to come together and do for ourselves and the people of God what God has given us the ability to do, until we learn and understand that the white man of this world does not want us in their system, until we learn and understand that it's all right for us to create our own system of social and spiritual independence, until we learn and understand that we don't need to work in their system to create our own independence, until we learn and understand that it is all right to separate from them and at the appropriate time accept them into our system, but only on God's principles and on our terms, until the church, not the building, but the true body of believers, you and I, until we understand that when we liberate the minds of our children, we will ultimately liberate the bodies of men. Until we understand and apply these principles, we will continue to take the blue pill of complacency and compromise and continue to live in oppression under the white supremacy of a fictitious democracy, only to enjoy the benefits of our holistic salvation when Jesus comes to liberate us from this world of sin. Our heads are bowed and our eyes are closed. Father, just as our ancestors cried out to you while they were in the chains of Egyptian bondage, we, your people, cry out to you tonight. We cry freedom tonight from all forms of oppression. Heal our hearts. Heal the hearts of your children that are hurting and mourning the loss of their loved ones at the hands of a repressive, unjust system. Hear our cry, O God. Hear, answer, and save. And we ask it in the name of Yeshua, Jesus the Christ, our Lord and Savior, we pray. Amen and amen. God bless you.
Amen. And thank you again to each of you who joined in for engaging such great information with us. If you are a Pillars of Faith member or just anyone who's worshiping with us and would like to close off the Sabbath, feel free to log on to our Zoom and do so as well. And just once again, thank you and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.